I'm sure you're all aware that a lot has happened since the last update I gave about a month ago. So what I'd like to do in the next 20 minutes or so is review for you the process and the types of vaccines that are being produced. Then go over some of the examples that you've been hearing about on the news. And then at the end, just review some of the other modalities that are being looked at as treatment for COVID-19. So with that, we'll get started. Let's see if I can do it this way. Okay, well, I think if you're reading the papers or hearing the news, you know that there are a lot of researchers working in developing COVID-19 vaccines. The last count I saw was over 159 are in development around the world. And you may remember that our FDA defined effectiveness for these vaccines to be at least 50% of the people who get the vaccine have to be protected. Now, they also said that even people that do get infected, they'll have a milder disease after the vaccine. They, compared to the flu vaccine, the standard for that is only 40 to 60% effective. And I think anybody who's had a flu shot and then gets the flu a week or two later can attest to that, although we do think it's probably a milder disease. It's estimated that over 7 billion doses will be required worldwide in order to control this pandemic. Now, I wanted to go over a little bit about the development of a vaccine. We talk a lot about, and it's in the news, the phase 3 clinical trials, but a lot has to happen before we get to that point. And I've listed some of the activities here. First of all, in the preclinical testing, this is when the vaccine is given to animals, usually mice or monkeys, and then they measure to see if an immune response in the form of antibodies has taken place. On phase 1 trial, then they use a small number of people, and they're essentially testing for safety. And sometimes they're working out a dosage to see if they can do better, get better immunity with different size doses. And then phase 2 expanded usually goes from a small number to hundreds of volunteers. And at this point, they usually split them up into different groups, especially by age, since they're very interested in how the response will be, especially in elderly populations and also populations that have other coexisting diseases. So they would, in phase 2, be measuring for safety, looking for adverse events, and also looking at the production of the immune response. How strong is the antibody response to the vaccine? And then what we've heard a lot about in the news are these phase 3 clinical trials. And these are really extensive. They have thousands of volunteers participate, sometimes 30,000. And the thing about these trials, the important thing is that they are what we call randomized clinical trials with placebo groups. And what that means is that half of the people will get the vaccine, and then half will get a placebo shot. In this case, it's most of these vaccines are given intravenous. Usually there's a 2-year follow-up, and they're looking for, again, response to the vaccine in the form of antibodies, and also for any side effects or adverse events. After that, then they can get early or limited approval. It's called an emergency utilization authorization in the United States, and that's given by the FDA. And they have certain requirements before they will even consider looking at data and to give this emergency use. If they do get it, the study continues, and then eventually there'll be approval by the FDA, and then the vaccine can be licensed. Okay, the vaccine production, there's really several ways to produce a vaccine. So I thought I'd just quickly review that for you. First of all, we all know that this virus came from China, and the end of December, they were reporting cases. And on January 10th, China had posted the genetic sequence of this virus on a website so that all researchers had access to it. And because of that, this genetic type of vaccine could be produced. Now, a genetic type is a vaccine that delivers this messenger RNA with the blueprint for the spike protein, which can be put into our cells to produce an immune response. Now, the spike protein, I'm sure you've seen all these pretty pictures of the virus with this little red thing sticking up out of the body of the virus. And that's the protein that attaches to our cells when we are exposed and infected. There's two types of genetic vaccines. One is the synthetic messenger RNA type, and that's the type that's used mostly, although there are a few in other parts of the world that are using DNA for making their vaccine. So that's the type that is new way to do it. And the ones that you're hearing about on the news are usually synthetic messenger RNA vaccines. There is an older method, and it's called viral vector vaccines, VV. And these vaccines use other viruses are engineered to carry the genes for the spike protein into the body of the recipients. Another way that they can do it is what they call protein-based vaccines. And in this, the protein fragments are packed onto nanoparticles and then they are injected. And in that particular type, there's no genetic material at all that's in the vaccine. And then the last type is what we had up until about the mid-1970s for all our vaccines. And this was to grow the virus, then inactivate it or kill it or take part of it, and then use that part in the actual production of the vaccine. Now, I did want to mention the research on this synthetic messenger RNA because it really was written up in 2005 at the University of Pennsylvania. And this woman, biochemist, Caitlin Carico, is the one who really showed that it could be used safely in humans. It had been shown previously in animals, but she was the first one to demonstrate it in humans. And with her co-worker at the U of Penn, Drew Weissman, they wrote this paper, and this is how really it all started. And there is a lot of talk that these two people will probably be considered for the Nobel Prize in future if this all works out. There's a very interesting Boston Globe article of November 10th about the history of this biochemist and all the people that were involved in developing the vaccine at Moderna and also at some of the other companies like Pfizer. So if you know any young people that are interested in science, it would be a very good article to Google. Okay, now this is the one you probably heard most about, Moderna, and it is a genetic vaccine. Moderna is located in Massachusetts, and they make the vaccine, and they also have funding from the NIH. And this is the messenger RNA that's used for the vaccine. And in their phase 1 trial, they showed that 88 of 45 developed antibodies. And they started the phase 3 in July of this year with 30,000 participants. They all had to be over the age of 17. And this vaccine requires 2 injections 28 days apart. Now, again, as I mentioned, it's a randomized placebo-controlled trial. So half would get the actual vaccine and half would get a placebo. And essentially, when they have everybody enrolled, they essentially want them to go forth and be exposed. They'll be testing for viral antibodies, and they'll be testing for any adverse effects. And usually the follow-up of the participants in these studies is for at least 2 years. And then the FDA has required that they can't really report until they have at least 150 infections documented, and hopefully the majority of them will be in the people that got the placebo. Now, on the 16th of this month, they did report the 95 cases with a 94, almost 95% effectiveness rate, which is really good. And also one of the things that their vaccine is supposed to be stable or more stable than some of the other ones. And this is an issue with these genetic vaccines, their stability at room temperature. They are not. The other company that you've heard about is Pfizer and BioNTech, which is a German company. It's the BioNTech that actually develops the vaccine, and Pfizer has some manufacturing and distribution parts of it. So we all know Pfizer, it is an American company, although it's multinational, and BioNTech is a German company. And the vaccine, again, use messenger RNA. They all put this little set of numbers on there when they develop it. And essentially what happens that it's injected and our cells make the viral proteins that stimulate the immune response from our bodies. Again, this requires 2 doses. And again, when they did their part 3 clinical trials, they had 30,000 people enrolled. And just last month, the FDA gave them permission to lower the age group from 12 to 18. So we'll get data on this particular age group. No vaccines are presently being tested that I know of in children under the age of 12, but at some point that will have to be done because obviously children will have to be immunized as well. Okay, we already have contracts, our government, with Pfizer to provide 100 million doses for the United States once this is approved by the FDA. And also our government through the CDC has contracted with McKesson to distribute this vaccine because again, this is the one that requires a very, very cold temperature for transport and distribution. There was a further report about the Pfizer-BioNTech earlier this month on the 9th, and they had reported data that they had collected 7 days after the second dose. They had at that point 94 cases, 9 in the vaccine group and 85 in the placebo group. And this is what gave them the very good effectiveness rate. Now, the FDA requires that they get data from 2 months post the second dose. So starting, I think the second dose, that means it will go on to December before they will be reporting to the FDA if they want to be considered for an emergency youth authorization. In their study, they did show immunity 7 days after the vaccine was administered. And one of the things that they don't know yet, because it's too early, is how long will the immunity last? And especially what is the immunity like in the senior population. Astrazeneca is another one, I misspelled it there, sorry, that you hear a lot about in the news. It's a viral vector type. It is not a genetic type of vaccine. And the vaccine's being developed at the University of Oxford. They use a chimp adenovirus with genetic material from, again, the spike protein. And our government has already done a contract with AstraZeneca to provide us doses. And this is really appropriate because at the point where we don't know which of these are going to be effective, some of them might be more effective in special age groups, some might be more effective in people that have comorbidities. So it's good that we're getting opportunities to have vaccines that work through different mechanisms. And as you can see there, their phase 3 trial was in the UK, Brazil, South Africa, and our country. Here in the US, we had 30,000 participants. And this is one of the problems with this vaccine. It does require dry ice transport. Again, there's 2 doses, 1 month apart. And again, the participants will be followed for 2 years. Their vaccine, they reported just today, was 70% effective. And the other thing, their methodology is a lot cheaper to produce the vaccine than the genetic manufacturing of the vaccine. So they are looking at producing enough to provide it to all the underdeveloped countries around the world. Another viral vector vaccine is being developed by Johnson & Johnson. And Johnson, this company has a long history in the vaccine production. They did it for Ebola. They did it for the Zika virus as well. And they're working with a hospital in Boston. They use the human adenovirus. The adenovirus is the common cold virus, and they use that to transport the material which will stimulate antibodies production. The good thing about their vaccine, it only requires 1 dose, and it can be stored in a regular refrigerator as a liquid for 3 months, as you can see there. Their trial, though, phase 3, only started in September, so it's going to have to go longer before it can even apply to the FDA for an emergency use authorization. And they will need to have 154 cases of the infection before the FDA would even look at it. It was paused for a while because the 20-year-old in Great Britain had a stroke. Now, this would be very unusual due to a vaccine. And so the trial has been resumed. This is what we call protein-based vaccine. This was the 3rd way to do it. And this company, Novavax, any that you see that has an asterisk beside it, it's one of the top 10 companies to produce vaccines around the world. This company, as you see, is based in Maryland. It started in August with its phase 2, and it will start here the end of this month. So again, this one is going to be a while before they have enough data and information, to apply for emergency use. But this is more the standard method for producing a vaccine. And it was used when you get your shingles vaccine or hepatitis B. This is how they produced it. Now they will need, according to what I've been able to read, 100 infections before they can apply for emergency use, and probably it will be early next year. This is a French company. It also uses the protein-based, and they work with GlaxoSmithKline, who gives them what we call an adjuvant to add to their vaccine. And this is supposed to be a substance that will, but in addition, have an extra stimulus to our immune systems. Again, it will be 1 dose, no need for sub-freezing temperatures, and their clinical trial won't start till next month. Okay, this is just a group of other vaccines that I saw. I thought it was kind of interesting for different reasons, and I'll just go through them quickly. If you see the first one, they are working to deliver it by a skin patch, which would be kind of interesting and make it a lot easier to distribute. The second one company is working with Elon Musk because he's getting involved for factories, microfactories, to produce all this messenger RNA. And the third one is going to be delivered through the skin with electric pulses to stimulate it, which I thought was interesting. Then there are a couple that are working to provide it in a pill form. There is one from Hong Kong that is working to produce it as a nasal spray, which would be very nice. And then the next company is using a tobacco plant cell to help create the protein shells. And then the last one, when I saw Kentucky, I was wondering if they're taking the rye used for their bourbon to produce a vaccine. But as you can see there, again, it's the tobacco cell-based vaccine. Now, I think I presented this before. This was the original report we had on the Russia vaccine. It came out last month. It was in Lancet magazine, very limited, no randomized trial. And the last thing the article said that they were going to start giving it to everybody in October. Well, we got another report recently that they are doing a phase 3 trial. You can see the details there. And what was interesting, the last bullet point, that they reported this information 2 days after Pfizer reported that they had 90% efficacy. So maybe the cold vaccine war is still going on here. This is a group you'll hear about. It's the Data Safety Monitoring Board. And this is a group here of independent physicians and experts. And this is the only people that have access to the unblinded data. All these studies done in the United States, the companies have to give their results in adverse effects and success in antibodies to this organization. And if somebody has an adverse effect, the company has to contact this board to find out if the patient had either the placebo or the vaccine. And so all the information goes through them, and then they will make a recommendation to the FDA. And the December 10th is the day to remember, because that is the day that the FDA advisory panel will be looking at all this data and making some recommendations about emergency authorizations. And I don't know, I think they said that that is going to be televised, so probably it'll be on C-SPAN. Now, this is just to review very quickly why some Americans fear vaccinations. And I'm sure you all heard about the anti-vaxxers, especially for giving DPT to children. And it was thought that this was a cause of autism, which is not true. It does not cause autism. And in fact, the doctor who wrote those first reports lost his license. Probably other reasons as well, but he was found to have given inaccurate data in that report. And then there was some trouble with the polio vaccines because they were before 1970 and they did have to have killed or attenuated viruses. And some vaccine did have live polio virus, and some children did get the actual polio infection from the vaccine. And the last one I have on here is just there were some problems with the anthrax vaccine that was developed for the military in 2005. You've heard a lot about Operation Warp Speed. This was started in May. Its goal was to accelerate not only the development, manufacturing, but the distribution of these vaccines, also medications and diagnostics. And their goal is to deliver 300 million doses by January 2021. It is basically a public-private partnership. It has a budget of $18 billion. And a week or so ago, the co-directors were at one of the news conferences. This is a cooperative effort with our military, which will be involved in the distribution. And in our country, it's thought that the healthcare workers will probably have priority when this is ready and distributed. And we have between 17 and 20 million people of our population that are in that category. Again, this advisory panel on the December 10th will be telling us a lot. Now, just briefly, I want to go over the other treatments. You've heard about convalescent plasma, monoclonal antibodies, and antiviral drugs. Also, immunosuppressants, dexamethasone. It's really not a treatment for the virus, but it's a treatment for the extreme inflammation that sometimes occurs because of the virus. And this is seen in the lungs. There have been reports of people who have had the virus who end up having to have lung transplants because this response has destroyed their lungs. Okay, the convalescent plasma is something that's been around for a long time. It's not new, and it was approved in August of this year. It's used at most hospitals, but there's no randomized clinical trials because we sort of know that this has antibodies from people that have had infections. Especially it has antibodies for people who have recently had a COVID infection. So researchers are trying to determine which antibodies that are in this convalescent plasma from patients that have had an infection and which antibodies are the most effective. The monoclonal antibodies are ones that are made in the laboratory. Regeneron is the one you might have heard about. As you can see, they put these crazy names on it. As you see, MAB, that's monoclonal antibodies. So if you ever see that in a report, you know that's what they're talking about. It's much easier to say it's a cocktail with two antibodies that neutralize the virus. And that's phase 3 clinical trial also started in July. It was tested in both hospitalized population and non-hospitalized. It again has to be given IV or IM in a single dose. And since it does have antibodies, it might also, in addition to treat somebody with infection, it might be used as a preventative for somebody that's in a high-risk category. And they got their emergency use on the 21st of this month. Just note, this treatment was given both to President Trump as well as Ben Carson and Governor Christie when they had their infections. Eli Lilly, with a biologic company, is also making these monoclonal antibodies. You can see the name of this one with MAB. I don't know if you saw Stephen Colbert. He had a whole segment on trying to pronounce this. I'm not even going to try. It has been approved for use in patients that are not hospitalized and not requiring O2. So this one would not be used in the hospital setting. And they're just in phase 2. I had mentioned at the beginning, sometimes these earlier phases, they check and try different doses in the people who get the vaccine. This was one of the cases. 370 people who got the vaccine got one of these 3 doses, and their data showed that this middle dose was the most effective in producing antibodies. And they got their emergency use approved on November 9th. Antiviral drugs, this is how they work. They inhibit enzymes that let the virus enter our cell, or they block enzymes that the virus needs to mature and to reproduce itself. Remdesivir is one you probably heard about. This is the drug name. It's made locally by Gilead down in the South Bay, and it prevents the viral RNA from reproducing. The first NIH study looked promising and had 1,000 patients, but it was only measured to shorten hospitalization. A World Health Organization study recently reported that there was no improved mortality. It is given IV for 5 or 10 days, and its use has become controversial. There were recent reports by intensivists. These are doctors who work in the intensive care unit taking care of these patients, and they came out with a statement that they are no longer using it in the intensive care patients. And there was some concern about kidney toxicity with the drug. Okay, almost done. I wanted to tell you a little bit about Sweden and herd immunity. You might have read in the paper, Sweden has essentially done nothing to try and prevent the spread. And I'll just hurry and go down here. By letting it go through their community, they had predicted that 40% of the people in Stockholm would have antibodies by May of this year. As you can see, actually, when they did the measurement, it was only 11.4% had antibodies, and in the whole country, only 7.1%. Here is the deaths per 100,000. You can see Sweden at 58.36, much higher than Finland, Norway, and Denmark, which all have restrictions of some sort and also recommend mask wearing. Herd immunity has never been achieved without a vaccine, according to the World Health Organization. And just what to do about vaccination, would I recommend that you watch the results, especially next month on the phase 3 trials. The only way we can defeat this is to get 70% of our population immune. That's going to be by having had and survived the infection or vaccination. And an immunization schedule will probably be coming out with priority, who's going to get it first. And that's very appropriate. There's been a lot of concern about whether or not the federal government can be relied upon, the FDA. Are they under a lot of pressure to release these vaccines early? And when Governor Newsom a couple weeks ago reported his distribution plans to the CDC, at that point, he said he was bringing together a local California panel that will review all the safety data for these vaccines that have been approved by the federal government before they will be distributed to the public in California. So I think the best estimate, most of us, when it will be available, will be either the 3rd or 4th quarter of next year, unless we're in a high priority group. And so in the meantime, I think we should all get our mask made for maybe springtime, maybe for next summer. Have a whole collection and wear them whenever you are out and in public. And also to be sure that everybody has gotten their flu shot this year. So with that, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them. Pardon me.